BMW's i3 is an electric vehicle unlike any we've seen to date. It can be bought either in pure electric form or with a range extender petrol engine added to prolong the period you can travel between potentially rapid charge-ups. The light weight of a specially developed state-of-the-art carbon fibre and aluminium chassis further helps extend that mileage, and, along with the startling power of the battery pack, also plays its part in creating the kind of dynamic driving experience you simply wouldn't expect an electric vehicle to be able to provide. But then, this is BMW's approach to EV motoring. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. It was only a matter of time before the prestigious brands entered the mainstream electric vehicle market. BMW were the first, and this is the car they bought us, the clever, futuristic i3. In size, as you can see, it's not a lot different from the kind of smartly badged small Audi, Mercedes or BMW that in decently pokey diesel automatic form would cost you about the same. The concept on offer here, though, is far more forward-thinking, that of offering zero emissions in a premium package, yet at an affordable price. Such an objective might sound straightforward, but the engineering necessary to deliver it is anything but. Hence the reported £2 billion development cost for this, the first in a whole series of alternative drive i-branded models we'll be seeing from the Munich maker. Like its sister model, the hybrid i8 sports car, this is a very different take on EV motoring, designed from the ground up as an electric vehicle, and unusual in the segment in its use of rear-wheel drive and its emphasis on an engaging at-the-wheel experience. It's groundbreaking too in the lightweight chassis and bodywork solutions that have left it far less heavy than other pure electric rivals. That's enabled BMW to fit larger lithium-ion batteries that in turn have boosted the operating range. And buyers still not convinced by that can also order a range extender version with a tiny two-cylinder petrol engine out back that almost doubles the length of journeys you can take between potentially quite rapid charges. In some ways, it's a car of contradictions, an individual choice yet with mass appeal, and an eco-warrior that a petrolhead might also enjoy. Ultimately, though, it's a BMW born to be electric, which ought to be a very good thing indeed. Let's find out. Here is a very different driving environment from the kind you'll be used to. No gear stick, no instrument cluster, and all the information you'll need marshalled by two freestanding screens. In this case, I've got keyless entry, which means that you press a start button, which in response delivers a chime rather than the sound of a starter motor. Now you've only to twist the column-mounted gear selector to drive. There's no creep like you'd get from a conventional auto, but brush the throttle and the i3 eases away with a gentle whir from its electric power plant. At last, it seems, the 21st century has properly arrived. Now I know what you're thinking, this car is all about sustainability and the rosy glow that comes with being an early adopter. But you know something? It's not. If ever you needed confirmation that this model is shot through with BMW DNA, a short trip in one provides it. This is anything but an anodyne electric box, all 50-50 weight distribution, feel and feedback, really rewarding you at the wheel. This thing has character to it, something evident not only through the futuristic style of the fittings, but also from the way it matches the instant throttle response you expect from an all-electric vehicle with the crisp steering feedback that you don't. This car's being developed and built by people who care. Before we go any further, though, we need to make very clear that there are two very distinct versions of the i3 that you can buy. There's a pure electric model, powered solely by an electric motor, and then there's the one that the vast majority of customers will choose, this range extender variant. Now, nestled back behind me, alongside the electric motor, is a Korean-built two-cylinder petrol generator, a power plant borrowed from a BMW scooter, and there to work in tandem with the 360-volt 22 kilowatt lithium-ion battery that propels this i3 along with impressive speed. Note that I've called it a generator rather than an engine. That's because it never actually drives the wheels, being only 647cc in size and developing just 37 brake horsepower. It probably wouldn't be up to that. Its role instead is merely to extend the life of the battery pack so that i3 owners don't suffer the sort of range anxiety that afflicts the drivers of many electric vehicles who picture themselves running out of juice somewhere inconvenient or just plain dangerous. If that looks likely to happen in this range extender version, then you just pop into a petrol station and top it up. The thing is though, this car is at its best when you're not using the petrol unit. Think of it as a get out of jail free card and try not to press it into service too often. How will that happen? Well, automatically mostly, the power plant cutting in with a clatter that's been fortunately well muffled in the cabin when battery capacity drops below 20%. When it is rumbling away out back, then your expectations of what the scooter engine can provide need to be realistic. After all, the tiny 9-litre fuel tank means it only extends the battery pack's 80 to 100 mile range by about 80 miles. And as I've said, the engine's assistance doesn't change the manner of your near silent milk float style battery powered mobility. I should point out before we go on that this range extender model's petrol generator doesn't have to work automatically. You can manually turn it either on or off via the car's iDrive settings menu. Why might you do that? Well, if you're on a longer trip, once the battery's range has gone down below 75%, you might want to switch the engine in earlier so that normal battery charge can be saved for city driving later on in your journey. Now, the other scenario is one where you're nearly home and the engine's about to cut in, yet you know from your remaining range that you can make it back to base. That's when you might want to stop the engine cutting in and needlessly using up fuel. Bear in mind though that if you get your range calculation wrong and run the battery power right down to the zero charge point where the engine's forced to cut in, you'll then be given that little scooter power plant an awful lot of work to do, as it simultaneously would have to charge the batteries while providing power to the electric motor. Something would have to give, which is why your top speed would then be limited to just 44 miles an hour, which wouldn't be a lot of fun on the motorway. And surprising as it might seem, fun is a big part of why you might want to buy this car. As I've been suggesting all the way through, it's everything you don't expect a pure EV to be. Yes, as you'd expect, all the traditional plus points of full electric motoring are here present and correct. So you get the refinement I've just mentioned, plus the low centre of gravity and subsequent feeling of all-round cornering balance generated by central placement of the heavy batteries. But that's not the primary memory you'll carry away from your test drive. No, you'll be pleasantly surprised and maybe even a little shocked by the speed of this thing. All full electric vehicles have instant torque from rest, but that's usually blunted by the heavy weight they tend to carry around. Now, thanks to this BMW's lightweight construction, it's no heavier than an ordinary Ford Fiesta. You really get to experience the sheer performance this technology can deliver. At typical city speeds, this can be quite startling. We're talking here about a car that can propel itself from 0 to 37 miles an hour in just 3.7 seconds, which is quicker than a V8 engine BMW M3 Super Coupe. In fact, if you've an i3, nothing short of a supercar is ever going to out-drag you away from the lights. There's something vaguely childish but comical about watching a GTI driver cooking their front tyres in a bid to catch up with this eco-minded electric runabout. Who says sustainability has to be so serious? The range extender model is obviously a little heavier than the pure EV version, its engine and fuel tank adding the weight of an extra podgy passenger. But the performance differential isn't very significant. The pure electric model's 7.2 second 0 to 62 mile an hour showing, slowing to a still respectable 7.9 seconds in this engine assisted variant. The top speed is pegged at an identical 93 miles an hour in both vehicles. That's if you use the drive system in its normal comfort or more efficient Eco Pro modes. Switch to the third Eco Pro Plus setting though, and your velocity will be restricted to just 50 miles an hour. Ultimately, it all boils down to the fact that this is the first car of its kind you could genuinely enjoy driving. That's one thing you'd expect from a model with that blue and white rondel on the nose. Another is the provision of drive to the back wheels rather than to those at the front, an unusual thing for an electric vehicle, and another reason why traction away from the line is so good. True, the tyres are skinny, but they do a remarkably effective job of setting torque to tarmac. The electric motor's rated at 170 brake horsepower and cranks out 250 newton meters of pulling power, enough to ensure the need for a little circumspection if you're pushing on through the bends. Though understeer, body lean and the lack of side bolster support on the seats will ultimately see you throttling back on the shopping rocket heroics. You'd expect that, though, from the tall, short appearance, the limitations of which are well disguised by the rear weight bias and the light but direct electric steering, borrowed from the latest Mini, that makes the car feel lithe and sporty, and with just 2.5 turns lock to lock, also endows it with quick reflexes in town. The 9.86 metre turning circle is comically small and beaten only by a London black cab. I could do with the ride being a little more forgiving though. Potholes and scabby surfaces are more of an issue in this BMW than they should be in what is first and foremost an urban runabout. Possibly the weirdest thing about driving the i3 is that you can perform most of your journeys in it using only one pedal. There are already only two, all EVs are automatic of course, but in most scenarios you can leave the brake pedal well alone. How so? Well, it's certainly something that takes a bit of getting used to. The moment that you lift your foot off the accelerator, the electric motor switches from drive to a recharging generator mode, feeding power into the lithium-ion battery. Now, at lower speeds, this has the side effect of creating a significant braking force, which means that if you plan ahead, you can soon carry out most of your slowing down manoeuvres without actually touching the brake pedal. Don't worry about being rear-ended by following cars either. As a safety measure, the brake lights come on if the regeneration slows you significantly. It all means that switching back into a conventional vehicle after using an i3 can be quite alarming if you forget what you're driving and expect the same kind of braking effect to kick in merely by rolling your foot off the throttle. One thing's for sure, you're not going to mistake the i3 for any other BMW. Interestingly, the German brand has elected to first clothe its futuristic e-drive technology with equally futuristic bodywork, rather than simply install it into a familiar existing model, a safer approach that the Volkswagen Group has taken with its rival e-Golf and Audi A3 e-tron models. Doing something similar would certainly have been less risky than producing a design as willfully extravagant as this. It would have been easier and cheaper too. After all, this Munich maker has already developed hundreds of Mini E and BMW 1 Series Active E prototypes that enabled potential customers across Europe to test the new technology. So why didn't they go that route? Well, because in doing so they would have created just another electric car rather than the definitive EV. Think of two of the main reasons why you might be hesitant to buy a model of this kind: restricted range and stodgy handling. Both have a lot to do with the heavy weight a vehicle of this sort has to carry around. Reduce that weight and the car becomes lithe, agile and able to go a lot further between charges. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Problem is, there's only so much you can do to reduce the bulk of the battery pack. What you can do though, in developing this kind of car, is to reduce the weight of the bodywork that surrounds that battery and the chassis it sits upon. But only if you design the thing from scratch. Now you see why a standalone model like this i3 was necessary. Going from a clean sheet of paper, the BMW eDrive design team could create a lightweight body perfectly balanced to suit the specific needs of its electric power pack. That weight saving could then be invested in larger batteries to improve the operating range. That was the idea. Here's the reality. With bodywork fabricated from the kind of aluminium and carbon fibre mix you'd find on a McLaren P1 supercar or an F1 Grand Prix racer. Those are the headlines, but the reality is that most of the carbon fibre used is blended with plastic, which sounds far less exotic. Still, what's important is the end result. Without the batteries, what we have here would be easily the lightest car on the market. Even with them, this BMW still only tips the scales at about 1.2 tonnes, about the same as a conventional Ford Fiesta, and between 200 and 300 kilograms lighter than pure EV rivals like Renault Zoe and Nissan's Leaf. That's impressive, but whether it all justifies a design quite as curious as this one is a judgment potential buyers will have to make. Just about the only car I can think of that looks anything like it in profile is Audi's old A2, another design thought of as being well before its time. The i3 is much bigger than the A2 though, measuring 4 metres in length, which means it's a few centimetres longer than a Ford Fiesta, but at nearly 1.6 metres high, quite a bit taller. Having said that, you don't see too many Fiestas riding on 19-inch wheels like those included here, unless you've got a few old copies of Max Power stashed away somewhere. I certainly like the front end, which introduces some subtle new vocabulary to BMW's well-established design language. The Munich maker's familiar front kidney grille is present and correct, but it's purely cosmetic, as the electrically powered i3 doesn't require any cooling air, even if you do choose one with a supplementary petrol engine out back. Positioned at the same height are sleek, Characterful headlamps, which sweep well back into the flanks and are framed by U-shaped LED light units. A neat black border connects the lower edge of the apron with these circular fog lights. Move around the car and the aesthetics get a little more controversial, with the major signature feature being what BMW calls a black belt. This made up of darkly coloured panels that extend from the bonnet over the roof and on into the rear with its starkly styled vertical tailgate, a hatch bejewelled with floating LED light units. If you're shocked by that, a closer look at the side profile will cause an even greater double take. Yes, the familiar so-called Hofmeister kink that characterises the trailing edge of the rear side windows on nearly all BMW models is present and correct, but you'll look in vain for anything else to visually connect this extravagant design with anything else you'll find in one of the Munich maker's showrooms. Perhaps the most curious touch is the sudden dip in the pronounced stream flow shoulder line just rearwards of the front doors. It's apparently there to create a larger side window surface for the rear passenger compartment, but it looks like a bit of an afterthought. You'll be glad that it's there though if you have to take a seat in the rear, which would otherwise be a bit of a black hole and pretty impossible to get to were it not for these opposing coach-style doors that open to reveal the lack of the kind of central B-pillar that almost every other car in the world has to have. Backseat occupants would be pretty much trapped if this BMW had one, but the bodywork and chassis of an i3 are so stiff it isn't necessary. So it is that, rather against the odds, what we have here is a car that's incredibly easy for anyone of any age to get in and out of. It is unfortunate, well, a couple of things. First of all, that the door judders at the front when it shuts, not really the kind of BMW build quality you might be used to. And secondly, that the front door has to be opened before you can open the one at the rear, which means that you have to act as a kind of chauffeur every time you, say, drop the kids off at school. Talk of children brings up a potentially deal-breaking point for a family man like me with 3 offspring. Namely, that only 2 people can actually be accommodated back here, even though 3 would probably fit at a squash thanks to the lack of the usual centre transmission tunnel. My lot wouldn't like the fixed side windows either. On the plus side, those passengers you can take will enjoy reasonable rear legroom thanks to the thin front seats and plenty of headroom too, even with this sunroof fitted. Although, because there's a battery pack under the floor, your feet and knees are a bit higher than would otherwise be the case. It's certainly a flexible space, the completely flat floor making it possible to easily shimmy across the car and exit on the other side. Which you can also do up front. There's a totally flat floor here too. Yeah, the roomy feeling that you get comes with no caveats, thanks to the low window line, the tall, airy cabin, and in this case, the optional glass roof panels. There's no conventional instrument cluster, just two high-definition LCD screens, one behind the steering wheel and the other either 6.5 inches or optionally, as here, 10.25 inches in size, sited at the top of the centre console and big enough for rear seat folk to see. The gear selector and start-stop button share a stalk projecting from the steering column, and you engage gears using this rotary controller, which moves either forwards or backwards. The central design element is this arc of trim extending from the air vents on the right-hand side of the cockpit, which continues behind the steering column and reaches its full height above the usefully deep top-lidded glove box. This surface can be specified as here in eucalyptus wood, and around it lie other renewable materials like naturally treated leather, wood and wool. Everything centres around eco-minded sustainability, with 25% of the plastics that would normally be used in an interior of this sort replaced with recycled or renewable elements. The leather used is treated solely with natural substances, but I'm less keen on the material used on the instrument panel surround and the door trim panels, which apparently uses fibres from the Kenneth plant. Maybe so, but it still reminded me of loft insulation. Still, it would certainly impress your green bearded friends. If you want a little more luxury, BMW offers 3 further trim packages, interior worlds as the marketeers rather pretentiously call them. Loft, lodge and this suite trim level add things like eucalyptus wood, velour floor mats and stitched leather. That only leaves the boot, which offers a relatively restricted 260 litre capacity thanks to its high floor. Now that's quite a bit smaller than that you'll find in theoretical all-electric competitors like Renault's Zoe and Nissan's Leaf. Having said that, it is bigger than the trunk you'll find in a Ford Focus Electric and about the same size as that provided in what is probably this car's closest market rival, Volkswagen's e-Golf. There are rubber tie-down straps and lashing eyes, plus an underfloor compartment. But if you do need more room and can fold down the 50-50 split rear bench, you'll create a completely flat surface, freeing up 1,100 litres. Most i3 models will be leased, but if you are looking at buying outright, you'll need to know that pricing starts at just over £30,000 for the pure electric version. Now, you can tack on another £3,200 onto that if you want the range extender model, which seems quite a lot to integrate a scooter engine. From these figures, you can then subtract the £5,000 you'll receive in government grants, which means that an all-electric i3 can be on your drive for a little over £25,000, with the range extender version setting you back a little over £29,000. The range extender version is the one that we've been trying here, a car that one motoring journalist dubbed the coward's choice. Well, paint the yellow if you like, but as someone who routinely pulls his mobile out to find the battery pancaked, I'm not sure I'd be altogether different charging a car. It's certainly true that if you really get your act together and use the i3 as efficiently as possible, ownership of this version will see you paying for and lugging around a hunk of metalwork in the back that'll rarely, if ever, be used. But if I was buying this car, I personally wouldn't care about that. Peace of mind is hard to put a price on. BMW reckons that most customers will agree with me, over 80% likely to choose the range extender option with this i3, which means we're either a nation of cowards or something different. Pragmatists, I'd say. On to how the asking prices for both versions of this car stack up as value propositions on both sides of the growing electric vehicle market. Now, all the EV model prices and values I'm going to quote you assume subtraction of the government grant I mentioned earlier. In other words, they're based on what you'll actually pay. With that established, let's begin by looking at the all-electric version of this i3 and pointing out that it's a bigger design than battery-powered versions of cars like Smart's 4.2 and Volkswagen's Up. Larger too than the Mitsubishi MIEV, Citroën C0, Peugeot Ion all-electric design. Given that, excepting the tiny Smart, all of these models are priced in the £20,000 to £25,000 bracket, you can see this BMW's appeal. There are better, closer all-electric matches to this car, of course, but all of them bear less prestigious badging. Ford's attempt is a bit half-hearted. It's Focus Electric, offering less power and a starting price of around £29,000. The Renault-Nissan Alliance's efforts have been more credible, bringing us two strong contenders, the Renault Zoe, which will probably cost you around £18,000 once you factor in battery leasing costs, and the Nissan Leaf, which, battery inclusive, is priced from around £21,000. Now, both cars are effective and well designed, but I get the impression that a potential BMW i3 owner is likely to be more attracted by Volkswagen's entrant in this segment, the e-Golf. It won't cost you much less than this BMW, but it may well appeal if you want to be a little more subtle about your eco-credentials. On to the range extender version of this i3 that I've got here. Now, two key rivals offer the same kind of technology. Vauxhall's Ampera, which costs a little less, and the car that most potential owners of this BMW are more likely to want, the Audi A3 e-tron, which mates a 148 brake horsepower petrol engine to a 99 brake horsepower electric motor. Problem is, it can cost up to £4,000 more, depending on the spec you choose. Those then are all the pure electric and battery power with range extender engine options. Obviously, I could go on for a very long time here if I also bring in comparisons with hybrid models and diesel power, but let's make a few general observations. All-electric i3 variants can be on your driveway for around the same cost as, say, the kind of comparable BMW 120D automatic diesel sport hatch model you'd probably find on the other side of your local dealer's showroom. Go for an i3 with range extender technology and you're looking at paying about the same as a Pokia 125D automatic diesel variant of the same sport hatch model. That's the kind of choice you have to make. Finally, I should probably finish my comparative comments by saying a word about plug-in hybrids. These offer less range and, in the case of, say, a Toyota Prius plug-in, will set you back £3,000 to £4,000 more. Ultimately, the technology that's created this i3 does seem to be a much better solution. If you agree and BMW's route to market has tempted you towards ownership, what can you expect to find included as part of this car's standard tally to go with the basic spec and its 5-metre charging cable? Well, quite a lot, actually. I could talk for hours about the satellite navigation system because it's one of the cleverest setups I've come across, not only directing you to local charging points, but also constantly helping you achieve the maximum driving range this car is capable of. Other more conventional features include auto headlamps and wipers, parking sensors, cruise control with a braking function, an anti-dazzle interior mirror, air conditioning, and a multifunction leather-trimmed steering wheel. The stereo system features DAB digital radio and includes Bluetooth and USB inputs. You also get 19-inch alloy wheels, though I can't say I'm too struck by the star-spoke design you get with the standard spec. Just as well that this car has had the much nicer turbine spoke rims fitted, although you'll pay nearly £700 for that privilege. Other options that you might want to consider include an upgraded Harman Kardon stereo and a park assist package comprising a camera and parking sensors. Nice to have, but things I'd budget for only after I'd treated myself to the BMW Professional Media package, which features a bigger and much nicer central display screen, increased in size from 6.5 to 10.25 inches, and featuring real-time traffic information and other connected drive services. This test car's also had a few extras added. including adaptive LED headlights, an electric glass sunroof, metallic paint and comfort access, which is keyless entry to you and me. The other main decision you've to make as a potential owner is to choose between the various interior world options that BMW offers for this car. Essentially 3 interior trim packages that, dubbed Loft, Lodge and, in this case, Suite, take the futuristic look of this cabin to the next level. Loft claims to offer so-called cool light colours, but is in reality rather overly grey. Lodge is a little brighter, while the Suite package that I have here makes more use of classy hide finishes. You have to go for either Lodge or Suite to get this car's strip of eucalyptus fascia wood that I rather like, but which my wife thought reminiscent of a 1960s kitchen. As already suggested, the Suite package also gives you Dalbergia brown leather surfaces for the seats, centre console and door armrests. Plus you get a satin silver accent ring for the steering wheel. It's probably the spec to have, if you can afford it. And safety-wise, well, BMW were a bit irritated when the Euro NCAP testers gave this car a 4 rather than a 5-star rating. Apparently there were a few minor side impact protection issues. It does seem to be well provided for in this regard though, with twin front, side and curtain airbags, Isofix child seat fastenings and tyre pressure monitoring, along with a whole raft of electronic safety kit, including an emergency call button that connects you through to a helpful operator if you get into problems. The ABS braking has fading compensation plus dynamic brake control, brake standby and brake assist to help in emergency stops that'll be aided in the wet by a brake drying function that keeps the discs free of moisture. There's also cornering brake control, hill start assist to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, and the usual dynamic stability control system you'd expect. You can also set the car into DTC, that's dynamic traction control mode, which allows for a degree more slip that helps either when pulling away on snow or loose sand, or during those times that'll see you want to drive the car a bit more enthusiastically than normal. I've a feeling those will be quite frequent. And there's more. BMW has developed a whole raft of what it calls intelligent safety technology for this car, much of which you can activate via a centre dash button. These include a rear collision detection system that can cancel energy recovery if it senses a possible impending impact. There's also a forward alert with city braking function that uses a radar mounted at the top of the windscreen to scan the road ahead as you drive for potential vehicle collision hazards. If one is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond or aren't able to, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. The system can also be specified to identify potential pedestrian hazards and work in the same way. So, the i3's clever, high-tech and impressively light, the most affordable carbon fibre-rich vehicle on general release. All of which will certainly help in pursuit of the kind of super efficient cost of ownership figures that made you want to consider one in the first place. Exactly what these will end up being will of course depend very much on how you plan to use this car. If you were to be running it for 3 years, covering typical city car mileages of about 7,500 miles every 12 months, you would in truth probably do better overall by choosing a cheap Super Mini with a 1 litre petrol engine. However, factor in something like the London congestion charge, which could set you back as much as £8,000 for that period. Then couple it with the minimal fuel bills and likely strong residual values of the i3, and this BMW starts to look a whole lot more attractive, especially when you consider the personal taxation advantages. The all-electric version is, after all, BIK tax-free, while this range extender model's official 13 grams per kilometre CO2 rating means it qualifies for a mere 5% of benefit-in-kind liability. Corporate business customers benefit from a 100% capital write-down allowance and very low levels of national insurance taxation. All that's assuming, of course, that you can afford this BMW's upfront asking price. it's certainly relatively easy to financially justify one in comparison to the kind of similarly sized diesel automatic BMW 1 Series, Mercedes A-Class or Audi A3 that would cost you much the same kind of money. As I've already suggested, much will depend on how long your commute is. BMW has used government statistics to calculate that the average drive to work is 13.1 miles each way, which, if true, is certainly well within the capability of the all-electric i3 variant. That's a car which official statistics suggest can offer a range of up to 118 miles on the European test cycle. Mind you, my experience with electric cars to date has taught me to deeply distrust official statistics, and rather refreshingly, BMW doesn't seem to hold much with them either, preferring to quote a real-world range of 81 miles in wintry conditions and 100 miles in the summer. If just listening to those kinds of figures prompts you into an attack of so-called range anxiety, then the i3 range extender model that I'm driving here is the version for you. To a point. The little motorcycle petrol engine, here mated with battery power, is reasonably efficient, but unfortunately must operate with a tiny 9-litre fuel tank that offers you an extra driving range of no more than about 80 miles. In other words, your total real-world range is extended over that of the pure electric i3 to a figure somewhere between 150 and 186 miles, depending on season and conditions. Based upon battery and engine combined use over that sort of distance, BMW claims the combined cycle i3 fuel figure to be an astonishing 470.8 miles to the gallon. Not that there's any readout in the trip computer menus to tell you what your average fuel economy is, which seems a bit odd in such a frugally focused car. Based on its use of petrol alone, this car delivers only about 40 miles to the gallon, which is what you get if you were to find yourself without electrical backup for a few days. Now, given the fact that we're talking here about a tiny 2-cylinder scooter engine, that's far less impressive. Whatever the case, whether the combustion unit's kicked in or not, in driving this car, you'll still always be pretty conscious of the limits governing exactly how far you can go before everything potentially grinds to a halt. Such an eventuality is unlikely thanks to the inclusion of one of the cleverest satellite navigation systems I've ever come across. It links into the BMW connected drive setup that's been specially developed for the brand's i models, and is certainly a bit cleverer than your usual TomTom, thanks to the provision of what BMW calls a driving range assistant. Now, this figures out whether your destination is beyond the vehicle's range. If it is, then the navigation software will find you a more efficient alternative route. At the same time, the system will suggest that you switch the car into its hyper-efficient Eco Pro or Eco Pro Plus modes if you haven't done so already. You might want to think twice before going the whole hog and selecting Eco Pro Plus, for this mode will limit your top speed to 50 miles an hour and reduce the performance of the air conditioning. Assuming that you can continue towards your intended destination, further assistance will be provided by the system's dynamic range display. This takes into account the battery's charge status, use of air conditioning, lights and wipers, your driving style and your chosen driving mode. Then factors in the hilliness of your route, likely traffic levels and even the outside temperature. Once it's crunched all those numbers, it then shows you what BMW calls a spidergram, a kind of bubble-like graphic on the nav screen which shows you exactly how far you'll be able to travel at any given time on your journey. It's uncannily accurate too. The other, more predictable feature this sat-nav system offers is in the way it'll help you find public charging points to replenish this BMW and theoretically tell you whether they're free of charge or not. At the time of this car's launch, there were about 1,700 of these around the UK, with the number growing all the time. With outputs ranging between 7 and 22 kilowatts, these public charging places can, depending on the one you come across, generally charge your i3 in anything between 1 and 4 hours. If you're really lucky when out and about with this car, you'll be able to use one of the so-called rapid charging points being placed systematically at key locations, such as motorway service stations for long journeys. These put out a fizzing 50 kilowatts and can give this BMW an 80% charge in just half an hour. That'll be enough to cover most typical commutes. Most of the time, of course, you'll be charging up overnight at home, provided, of course, you have off-street parking. If you don't, you might as well forget EV motoring altogether. Assuming that's not a problem though, BMW will sell you a 7.4 kilowatt iWallbox Pure charger that provides a 0 to 80% charge in 3 hours and doesn't cost much more than around £300 fully installed. You really have to have this, I think, as on a standard 240 volt wall plug, you're looking at 7 hours or more for a full recharge. Either way, you can also set the car up on its integrated 7-day timer to charge itself on low-cost off-peak electricity tariffs. If you're not happy with those tariffs, you can look at switching your home's whole supply to BMW Green Energy, an eco-minded electricity supply offered in conjunction with BMW and the Good Energy organisation. What else? Well, the Munich maker offers all sorts of clever services for the i3, including a smartphone app that lets you remotely control wallbox charging, see available public charging stations, and even gives you turn-by-turn walking directions back to where you park your car. There's also the BMW Charge Now package, which for around £20 annually gives customers pay-as-you-go access to the largest nationwide network of public charging stations with a single card. Of course, there may be times when, despite all this cleverness, an i3 just isn't suitable for the kind of trip you have in mind. Say when you've a long holiday trip to make or you're setting off across Europe. Most owners will have another combustion engine, petrol or diesel car to cover this kind of scenario, but as an alternative, the Munich brand offers its BMW Access scheme. Now this gives an i3 owner 700 points to redeem against the use of other BMW Group vehicles to cover any short-term need for longer trips. That amount would get you a week in our 1 Series hatchback, and you can buy more points if necessary. 500 points would set you back about £240. At the time of this vehicle's launch, there were 47 BMW dealerships appointed as i3 agents, although the entire network can handle servicing of the car, the need for which you can always check via the iDrive system. A BMW maintenance fixed price servicing package is available on the i3 at point of purchase for less than £400, covering servicing costs for 5 years or 60,000 miles. I'd tick the box for that if I were you. The same package, including consumables, is somewhat less attractive at around £900 more. What else? Well, there's the usual BMW 3-year unlimited mileage warranty. Electrical parts get 8-year, 100,000 mile cover, and the 230 kilogram 96 cell lithium-ion battery comes with a 6-year, 100,000 mile peace of mind. Owners also get the benefit of BMW's iMobile Care scheme, which offers 24-hour roadside assistance, and insurance groupings have been lowered thanks to the replaceable nature of the carbon fibre plastic panels and are pitched at Group 21, the same as an ordinary BMW 118D hatch of similar size. Finally, there's the question of residuals, which will be the strongest in the EV marketplace. If so far you've been a bit sceptical about electric vehicles, then you need to try this one. Even if it doesn't change your viewpoint, you're going to have a heck of a lot of fun proving yourself right. It's distinctive, enjoyable, and feels like a genuinely special ownership proposition. Compared to this i3, even a talented vehicle like BMW's own 1 Series seems a bit grey and two-dimensional. Like it or not, this is the future for small cars. Like most British buyers, if I was spending my own money, I'd definitely go for the version with the range extender petrol engine fitted. It gives the car the added flexibility you'll appreciate when life doesn't quite go to plan, and apart from the premium being asked, other downsides are few. Quite frankly, why wouldn't you? That's a question you could ask of the i3 package as a whole, and answer negatively by citing prestige pricing, awkward looks and restricted rearward space. None of these things, though, are issues likely to unduly bother the vast audience BMW is targeting with this car. People who've so far stayed away from the electric vehicle revolution, but might well join it now. The i3 does, after all, mark a real milestone in EV development. Without wishing to patronise early adopting brands like Nissan and Renault, it feels like an amateur sport just went professional. With a carbon fibre chassis, brilliant connected drive services, a bold and futuristic design ethos, and genuine real-world ownership flexibility, the i3 is an electric vehicle that hasn't just moved the game on, it's rewritten the rules.